The sound came first, a single metallic click. Sharp, deliberate. The kind of sound that cuts through everything else in a room, through the rock music hammering out of blown speakers, through the clink of beer bottles and the low grumble of 24 conversations happening at once. The kind of sound that does not ask for attention. It commands it. In the Iron Wolf Motorcycle Club on the eastern edge of Kansas City, Missouri, on a Sunday night in late October, that sound did exactly what it was designed to do. 18 men went quiet. Not gradually, not one by one. All at once, the way animals go still, when something changes in the air around them, some deep wordless signal that the rules of the moment have shifted. The rock music kept playing. Nobody moved to turn it off. But it no longer mattered. Standing in the doorway, wearing blood-stained blue scrubs from a shift that had started 31 hours ago, was a woman, 5 feet 4 inches tall, dark eyes. 42 years old, though the lines around her mouth suggested she had lived considerably more than 42 years worth of days. She was holding a Glock 19 in both hands, and her finger was positioned outside the trigger guard with the practiced precision of someone who had been taught, and taught well, that a weapon is a tool, not a threat display. She was not shaking. That was the first thing the men in that room noticed. Not the gun, not the scrubs, not the dried blood on her forearm that may or may not have been her own. The first thing they noticed was that her hands were absolutely, completely still. Her name was Marlowe Reeves, and she had come for her son. To understand what happened in that clubhouse on that October night, you have to go back 3 days. You have to go back to a Thursday evening in the emergency department of Mercy General Hospital, where Marlowe was finishing her second consecutive 12-hour shift, and where a broken phone charger, a $7 piece of plastic and wire she had been meaning to replace for a week, was quietly ensuring that the next 72 hours of her life would become the longest of her existence. The ER had been running hot since Tuesday. A 4-car accident on I-70 had sent 6 patients through the doors in the first hour of her shift. A construction worker arrived with 3 fingers nearly severed by a table saw. An 8-year-old girl came in, seizing her parents standing in the hallway, gripping each other with the specific terrified helplessness of people who have no idea what to do with their fear, except hold on to each other and wait. Marlowe Reeves moved through all of it the way water moves through rock, not around it, but through it. Calm where others were frantic. Precise where others were improvising. The attending physician on shift that Thursday, a good doctor named Harlan, who had been practicing for 20 years and thought he had seen everything, watched her work and felt something he could not quite name. Not admiration exactly. Something older than admiration. Something closer to recognition. At 9:47 that evening, a man in his 60s came in by ambulance. Cardiac arrest in the parking lot of a grocery store. The paramedics had worked him for 7 minutes in the rig without getting him back. When they rolled the gurney through the doors, the monitor showed a flat line, and Harlan, reading the situation in one glance, began the calculus that emergency physicians learn to perform, the quiet arithmetic of time elapsed versus probability of meaningful recovery. He looked at the clock. He looked at the monitor. He began to say the words that end resuscitation efforts. Marlowe was already at the gurney. She worked him for 4 minutes. Harlan told her twice to stop. She did not stop. On the 4th minute, something flickered on the monitor, tentative, irregular, then steadying into a rhythm that made the room exhale as one. The man's name was Harold Decker. He was 64 years old. He had 3 grandchildren. He had been going to the grocery store to buy flowers for his wife's birthday because he had forgotten to order them online, which was something he did every single year. And his wife teased him about it every single year. And later, much later, when he was sitting up in a hospital bed holding those flowers and watching his grandchildren argue about who got to hold his hand, he would not know the name of the woman who had refused to give up on him. Marlowe Reeves did not stay to be thanked. She was already moving. This is who she was, a woman who moved through the world as if standing still was a form of failure. At 11:20 that Thursday night, she walked to her locker, opened it, and picked up her personal cell phone. The screen was dark. She pressed the button. Nothing. The charger had been plugged in since Tuesday morning, but the cord had been fraying for weeks near the connector, and sometime during those 2 days, it had finally given out completely. The phone was dead. Not low battery, dead. She borrowed a charger from a colleague, plugged in, waited 3 minutes, and turned it on. 41 missed calls, 17 voicemails, 23 text messages from numbers she did not recognize, and 1 text from Caden. Thursday, 11:15 p.m., 40 minutes ago. 3 words, "Mom, need help." She called back immediately. Straight to voicemail. She called again, voicemail. She tried 4 times in 2 minutes, standing in the hallway outside the locker room in her blood-stained scrubs, and each time the call went nowhere, and the silence on the other end of the line was the loudest thing she had ever heard. Marlowe Reeves had carried a lot of silences in her life. She knew the difference between the silence that means nothing is wrong and the silence that means everything is. This was the second kind. Caden Reeves was 19 years old and had his mother's eyes dark, watchful, taking in more than they gave away. He had been working part-time at Kellerman's Auto Repair, a small garage on Devlin Street on the east side of the city for 7 months. He had never missed a shift. He had never been late without calling. He kept his tools organized and his workspace clean, and his word was exactly as good as he said it was, which was something his mother had taught him by example rather than instruction. The garage sat directly across the street from the Iron Wolf Motorcycle Club. This was not a coincidence that Caden had paid much attention to. You work somewhere long enough, the things around it become scenery. The club was just there, the noise on Friday nights, the rows of motorcycles in the lot, the occasional hard-looking men who came and went at odd hours. Background, furniture, part of the landscape of a neighborhood that had seen better decades and was still waiting to see them again. Thursday night, Caden had stayed late to finish a brake job on a 2009 F-150. It was nearly 11 when he stepped outside to take the trash to the dumpster at the back of the lot. The night air was cold enough to make his breath visible. The street was quiet. He had his jacket unzipped and his hands were still greasy from the job, and he was thinking about nothing in particular. He almost missed it. 2 men in the parking lot of the club across the street. One of them he recognized. He had seen that man come and go from the club a dozen times over the past months. Stocky 40s, close-cropped hair, always drove a black Silverado with a dent in the rear quarter panel. The other man he had never seen before. Younger, athletic, wearing civilian clothes but carrying himself in a particular way, a quality of alertness and readiness that made Caden notice him in the way you notice something that does not quite fit the pattern. The conversation between them was brief and clearly not going well. The stocky man grabbed the younger man by the collar. The younger man did not flinch. He said something short. The stocky man let go, stepped back, made a phone call. Caden stood in the shadow near the dumpster and did not move. He was 19 years old and he had not lived through the things his mother had lived through. But he had been raised by a woman who treated situational awareness the way other mothers treated table manners as a basic requirement of functioning in the world. He knew when something was wrong. He had learned to know it before he could articulate why. He went back inside. He locked the garage door. He texted his mother, then he called 911. 2 minutes later, 2 unmarked vehicles pulled up to the garage. They were not police. They were something else. They showed him credentials and told him to come with them, and told him he had done the right thing, and told him not to contact anyone until they said it was safe. Caden Reeves asked about his mother. They said they would reach her. They did not reach her. Marlowe Reeves spent Thursday night making calls from the hospital. She called Caden's phone every 20 minutes until midnight. She called the garage, no answer. She drove past Kellerman's at 12:30 in the morning. Dark, locked. Caden's car was not in the lot. His motorcycle, a blue Kawasaki license plate, 7XR942, was not in the lot either. She filed a missing persons report at 2 a.m. The officer on duty was polite and professional and explained also politely and professionally that a 19-year-old male who had been unreachable for 3 hours did not yet qualify as a missing person under department guidelines and that she should check back if there was still no contact by morning. Marlowe went back to the hospital and worked her Friday shift. She told herself he is 19. He is safe. There is an explanation. She had told herself versions of this before in other places about other people, and sometimes it had been true. She worked Friday, she worked Saturday. She slept in the on-call room in 4-hour stretches because her apartment felt unbearable and because staying in motion was the only thing that kept the worst thoughts from taking up permanent residence in her chest. She called Caden's phone every 2 hours. She called his friends. She drove past his garage, past his apartment, past the coffee shop where he sometimes spent Sunday mornings. She called the police twice more. She was told the case was being looked into. She borrowed a phone charger and kept her personal phone plugged in at the nurse's station. Nobody called. Well, by Sunday afternoon, 72 hours had passed since Caden's last text. Marlowe Reeves had slept 9 hours across 3 days. She had lost weight she did not have to lose. She had, in the quiet intervals between patients, methodically gone through everything she knew, every piece of information, every observation, every detail, with the same systematic thoroughness she had once applied to very different kinds of problems in very different kinds of places. The garage on Devlin Street, the Iron Wolf Motorcycle Club directly across from it. The fact that Caden's motorcycle was still sitting in the club's parking lot, visible from the street, unmoving for 3 days. Still there on Sunday evening when she drove past at 10 in the night. She pulled over and put her hand on the engine casing, still warm. That meant someone had moved it recently enough that the engine had not cooled. 72 hours after Caden disappeared and someone had touched his motorcycle tonight. Not to hide it, something else. She did not know yet what, but she filed it the way she filed everything cleanly, without letting the filing show in her face. She sat in her car for a long time. Then she opened the glove compartment. The Glock 19 had been there for 5 years, ever since the day she moved to Kansas City, and decided that some habits were worth keeping. She had maintained it the way she maintained everything in her life, with quiet, consistent attention. She checked the magazine. She chambered around. She walked across the street and pushed open the door of the Iron Wolf Motorcycle Club. The moment the door swung open, the smell hit her first beer, and cigarette smoke and something underneath it. Something older and less definable that belonged to spaces where men had spent a long time being themselves without anyone watching. The music was mid-song, something with too much distortion and not enough melody. The lights were the kind that made everything look slightly wrong, slightly too yellow. 18 men, various ages, various sizes, all of them carrying the density of people accustomed to being the most dangerous thing in any room they entered. In the far corner, almost invisible in the shadow, an older man sat alone with a whiskey glass and a worn bronze coin that he turned over and over between his right thumb and forefinger, slowly without looking at it, the way a man handles something he has handled so many times that the motion has become involuntary. He was lean and weathered, somewhere in his late 60s, with the kind of face that comes from years of squinting into sun and wind and distance. He was not talking to anyone. He was not watching the room. He was somewhere else in the private geography of a man who has survived things that do not leave cleanly. When the metallic click of the Glock cut through the music, he set the whiskey glass on the table with great care and went very still. The coin kept turning between his fingers, just barely, the way a compass needle keeps moving even after you set it down. She stood in the doorway for a half second, not hesitating, taking inventory. The way you take inventory when you have been trained to, when the first 3 seconds in any room are not wasted on processing what you are seeing, but on categorizing it. Exits, obstacles, threats, distances. It was not a conscious process. It was something older than conscious thought, laid down in muscle and bone over years of doing it, in places where the cost of doing it slowly was measured in lives. The music kept playing, but the room went still. A man at the far end of the bar, 6'3", silver hair, a scar running from his left ear to the point of his chin, looked at her with the unhurried assessment of someone who had been the largest presence in every room he had ever entered. He did not stand up. He set his beer down. The man's name was Diesel Hargrove. He had run the Iron Wolf Motorcycle Club for 11 years. He had built it from 8 members and a shared storage unit into what it was now, and he had maintained his position through a combination of genuine leadership ability and an absolute refusal to be moved by anything he had not chosen to be moved by. Near the pool table, a man named Stellan Vance, 44 years old, road captain, built like someone who had once been lean and military and was now carrying the extra weight of years he did not want to account for, stopped moving his cue stick in mid-stroke. He looked at the woman in the doorway. Something moved across his face. Not surprise. Something that looked, if you knew what to look for, more like calculation. In the corner, the old man with the coin noticed this too. Lady, Diesel said, his voice carrying the unhurried authority of a man who had never needed to raise it. I think you've got the wrong address. I'm here for my son. Her voice did not rise. It did not waver. It cut straight across the room to him, carrying something in it that made the words land differently than they might have from someone else. A quality of absolute certainty that belonged to people who had said things that mattered in moments when the mattering was real and the cost was high. The room exploded with laughter. Not all of it, most of it. The big man near the bar, 250 pounds of intentional intimidation knuckles tattooed with something Marlowe did not look at long enough to read, slammed his bottle on the bar hard enough to make the wood shudder. Hospital's 10 miles that way, sweetheart. More laughter. Marlowe did not move. Her eyes swept the room in what looked like a casual glance, but was anything but a read of every position, every face, every visible weapon, every potential approach angle. She had done this so many times that it required about the same conscious effort as breathing. The pool table, the bar, the back hallway, 2 windows, 1 rear exit. At least 6 visible weapons, probably 8 or 9 if you counted the ones you could not see from the doorway, which she was already doing. Caden Reeves, she said, 19 years old, missing 72 hours. She let that sit for exactly 1 second. Last text I received from him was 11:15 Thursday night. 3 words. His phone has been dead since. GPS disabled. Bank account untouched. And his motorcycle blue Kawasaki plate 7XR942 is sitting in your parking lot right now with an engine that was still warm when I put my hand on it 20 minutes ago. The laughter faltered. Somebody in this room knows exactly where he is. Diesel studied her with the recalibrated attention of a man who has realized the situation may be different from what he initially assessed. He gestured toward the wiry man with prison tattoos covering both forearms, who stood to his left, the club's treasurer, a man named Cobra Walsh, who was already reaching for his phone with the instinctive motion of someone whose first response to any problem is to gather information. Don't know any boy by that name, Cobra said, scrolling with the practiced disengagement of a man who has been in enough rooms like this to know that the person asking the question is rarely satisfied by the answer. Then let me be more specific, Marlowe said. Detective Marcus Webb, undercover federal agent, 8 months embedded, disappeared Thursday night. She paused, letting the name do what it was going to do. The same Thursday night, my son sent me 3 words and then stopped existing as far as I can tell. The name landed like a stone into still water. The ripples went everywhere at once. Cobra Walsh's phone slipped from his fingers and hit the floor. Stellan Vance, near the pool table, pressed both hands flat against his thighs for just a moment, the involuntary gesture of someone absorbing a shock and working to contain it. He released the pressure almost immediately. But the man in the corner had been watching his hands since Marlowe walked through the door, and he had seen it, and he filed it without showing that he had. The big man near the bar, Brick Donovan, the club's enforcer, pushed off from the counter. His shadow crossed half the room when he moved. I don't care what you think happened here. You're on private property with a weapon in your hand. Time to go. He reached for her. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. She stepped back and to the left at precisely the angle that took her out of his reach, while simultaneously creating the leverage she needed. Her left hand came up to redirect his arm, not a block something more efficient than a block something that used his own momentum against him rather than opposing it. And then the weapon retention technique happened so fast and so quietly that several men in the room were not sure afterward exactly what they had seen. Brick's wrist turned in a direction it did not want to go. The pressure applied was exactly sufficient and not a pound more. He stumbled backward and caught himself on the bar, and the whole sequence had generated almost no sound whatsoever. The room went very, very quiet. Cobra Walsh, who had been calculating angles and options since Marlowe walked in, lunged forward. He made it 2 steps. The transition from low ready to high ready position took her less than a heartbeat, and the quality of her stance in that moment, weight distributed, shoulders set, the gun held, with the grip of someone who has done this 10,000 times, rather than 10, communicated something to every man in the room that no words could have communicated more clearly. Cobra stopped. Don't, she said. 1 word. She meant it. The entire room could tell she meant it. A young biker near the back wall, barely old enough to be in the club, had gone pale. He looked at the man next to him and said, barely above a whisper, "Did you see that oil?" In the corner, the old man with the coin slowly set it on the table. He was no longer turning it. He was looking at Marlowe Reeves with the full, settled attention of a man who has just placed something he has been trying to place for a long time. A young biker near the front had cut his palm on the broken edge of a beer bottle he had knocked off the bar in the commotion. He held up his bleeding hand with the lost expression of someone who has suddenly realized there is no good place to put this problem. Marlowe's response was immediate and did not appear to involve a decision. It simply happened the way things happen when they have been practiced past the point of requiring thought. She shifted the weapon to a controlled position, stepped toward him, and assessed the wound in 3 seconds. Direct pressure, elevate above heart level. Her voice in this register was entirely different, clinical, authoritative, but not unkind. Not deep, needs cleaning and butterfly closures. You'll be fine. The young man stared at her. How can you tell just from looking? Experience, she said. The old man in the corner stood up. He moved slowly the way men move when they have reached an age where moving slowly is an act of discipline rather than limitation, and when they have been through enough to know that most situations benefit from less motion rather than more. He raised both hands, palms open. He was not a tall man, maybe 5'10", built thin, with the kind of face that had been tanned dark by decades of outdoor living. He wore a vest with patches on it, but the way he carried himself did not belong to the club. It belonged to somewhere else. Something about him suggested distances, dry heat, the quality of patience that comes from having once spent a long time being very far from anywhere safe. His name was Ghost Calloway. He was 68 years old, and he had been watching Marlowe Reeves since the moment she walked through the door with the focused attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle that is more important than it appears. The coin sat on the table behind him face up, bronze and worn smooth at the edges. He did not look at it. He looked at her. "Ma'am," he said. The room turned toward him. "Where did you serve?" The question dropped into the silence like a stone dropped down a very deep well. Not "why are you here?" Not "put the gun down." Not "you need to leave." Where did you serve? Because whatever else was happening in this room, whatever the confrontation and the tension in the 18 men and the drawn weapon, Ghost Calloway had recognized something. He had seen it in the economy of her movements, in the quality of her stillness, in the way she had assessed that wound without needing to think about it. He had seen it in the fact that she was standing right now with her back toward the wall and sight lines to every exit without having been taught in this moment to stand that way. He had seen it in the fact that she had walked through that door in the first place. Marlowe Reeves looked at him. For the first time since she had entered the Iron Wolf Motorcycle Club, something shifted in her expression, not much, not visibly to anyone who was not looking carefully. But Ghost was looking carefully. What moved across her face in that moment was not fear, not anger, not the cold calculation she had been wearing since she walked in. It was surprise, the kind of surprise that comes when someone asks the exact right question. She did not answer him, not yet. But the way she looked at him, the way her eyes stayed on his face and read something there, the same way he was reading something in hers, told everyone in the room who was paying attention that Ghost Calloway had just changed the shape of this entire situation. The rock music was still playing. Nobody had thought to turn it off. Diesel Hargrove, who had been silent since the moment Brick Donovan ended up against the bar, was watching the exchange between his oldest member and the woman with the gun. The easy authority he had worn all evening had shifted into something more careful, more watchful. Marlowe kept her weapon where it was, kept her position against the wall. But she looked at Ghost Calloway, and Ghost Calloway looked at her, and in that look was a conversation that the other 17 people in the room did not have the vocabulary to understand. Outside, somewhere down the block, a motorcycle engine turned over in the cold night air. Marlowe Reeves had come for her son. She had not planned on being seen, but Ghost Calloway had seen her. And whatever came next, whatever the next hours held, whatever truths were about to surface in this smoky, neon-lit room, it was going to be different from what anyone had walked in expecting, including Marlowe herself. Nobody answered the question. That was the first thing. Ghost Calloway had asked Marlowe Reeves where she had served, and the room had shifted on its axis, and the question hung in the air of the Iron Wolf Clubhouse, the way smoke hangs diffuse, present everywhere at once, impossible to point to, and equally impossible to ignore. Marlowe looked at him. He looked at her. And neither of them said anything for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Then Diesel Hargrove cleared his throat, and the moment broke. "Doc," Diesel said, Doc being what they called Ghost Calloway. Inside these walls, a name that fit and did not fit at the same time, the way most names given by clubs fit and do not fit. This isn't the time. Ghost did not look at Diesel when he answered. He kept his eyes on Marlowe. "It might be exactly the time," he said. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." Marlowe had repositioned slightly while their attention was on Ghost, a half step that meant nothing to most of the room, but meant she now had a cleaner sight line to the rear hallway. She had done it without appearing to do it. Ghost noticed. He had expected her to. "Detective Marcus Webb," she said again, returning to the ground she had already claimed. "Undercover federal agent. 8 months embedded. Disappeared Thursday night." She paused. "The same Thursday night my son sent me 3 words and then stopped existing as far as I can tell." Cobra Walsh had not picked his phone up off the floor. He was looking at it the way a man looks at something he is weighing whether to retrieve or leave behind, calculating what the act of picking it up might communicate. His arms stayed at his sides. At the pool table, Stellan Vance had gone quiet in the way that people go quiet when they are working hard to appear normal. He had set his cue stick down against the table's edge. His hands were at his sides, loose and open, and if you were not watching for it, you would have read this as ease. Ghost Calloway was watching for it, and he did not read it as ease. He read it as a man keeping his hands visible by choice, the careful deliberateness of someone managing their own behavior rather than simply existing inside it. Ghost filed this the way he filed everything. quietly, without showing that he had. Diesel moved away from the end of the bar, not toward Marlowe, but perpendicular, a slow, considered movement that put him in the approximate center of the room, which was where he tended to position himself when he was thinking rather than reacting. He was a man who had survived 11 years at the head of an organization that did not forgive weakness by knowing the difference between those two states. "You're making a serious accusation," he said. "Federal investigation. Missing agent. You understand what you're saying." "I understand exactly what I'm saying. And you walked in here with a weapon because you understand it." "I walked in here with a weapon, Rio," Marlowe said, "because I've been awake for 31 hours. My son has been missing for 72, and I've been out of options since Saturday morning. The weapon is because I'm not stupid." Diesel looked at her for a long moment. He was not a stupid man himself, which was something she had already assessed. Stupid men ran organizations like this into the ground in 18 months. Men who lasted 11 years at the head of something this complicated were not stupid. They were calculating and experienced, and they knew when a room had changed around them. This room had changed. The laughter that had filled it 20 minutes ago was gone as completely as if it had never existed. What had replaced it was something denser, a composite of wariness and uncertainty, and in a few cases the beginning of something that looked like respect. Brick Donovan was nursing his wrist near the bar. He was not making a production of it. He was simply aware of it in the way a man is aware of something that surprised him, and he was looking at Marlowe with an expression that had shed most of its earlier contempt and replaced it with something he probably would not have named if asked. Outside, beyond the grimy windows, headlights swept across the parking lot. Then another pair. Then a third. Razor Pete, the sergeant-at-arms who had been near the front windows since the moment the tension started, because 18 years with the club had trained him to orient toward exits and perimeters, the way a compass orients toward north turned from the glass. His face had changed. "Diesel." His voice was flat and tight. "Black van, tinted windows, across the street, two sedans behind it. They're not moving." The room changed again, this time faster. Weapons appeared with the practiced speed of men who had rehearsed this in their heads, if not in reality. Pistols from waistbands, a shotgun from behind the bar, that the bartender Ren Stafford produced with the resigned efficiency of someone who had known it was there and had been hoping not to need it. Men moved to positions near the walls. The pool table became cover. The rear hallway suddenly had two men in it who had not been there before. The rock music was still playing. It had become absurd. Marlowe stood in the center of all of it and did not move. She watched the chaos organize itself around her with the calm of someone who has been in rooms where panic was lethal and learned at a biological level to contain it. Her breathing was controlled. Her weapon was in a compressed, ready position. She was tracking everything: the men near the walls, the positions of the exits, Diesel at the center, Ghost still by the corner table, and Stellan Vance, who had moved from the pool table to a position near the side wall that happened to put him closer to a door that was not the front door. She tracked him. She did not show that she had. Then Marlowe spoke. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. "All stations stand down." The words were not loud. They were not delivered with anger or desperation or the escalating urgency of someone who has lost control of a situation. They were delivered in a register that had no name in civilian life, but that every person in that room who had ever worn a uniform, Ghost, Calloway, Stellan Vance, and one or two others, felt in their bodies before they heard it with their ears. The register of command, not the performance of it. The actual thing. The room stuttered. Cobra Walsh's phone call paused. Razor Pete turned from the window. Even Diesel, who had not taken a direction from another human being in 11 years, went still for a half second, and that half second was long enough. "Nobody move," Marlowe said. "Nobody do anything until you hear what I have to say." Brick Donovan pushed off the bar despite his wrist. He crossed the room toward her with the confidence of someone who had learned that his size solved most problems. His patience did not, and he had not fully absorbed the lesson of the first time. He was about to finish absorbing it. The second time was worse than the first for the simple reason that he was angrier and less careful. He reached for her with both hands this time, and what happened to both hands happened very fast and involved leverage and angles that did not require Marlowe to use more than a fraction of his force against him. He went into the bar a second time harder. A row of glasses shuddered. Two of them fell. In the process, his right hand caught the fabric of her scrubs at the shoulder seam and tore it. The tear was not dramatic. It was maybe 4 inches of blue fabric opening at the shoulder and pulling the worn material away from what lay beneath it. What lay beneath it was a tactical vest, matte black, well-used, the kind of equipment that does not come from a sporting goods store. And above the vest on the left shoulder, where the scrub top had torn away completely, there was a tattoo. An eagle, wings spread wide, talons gripping a rifle. Each feather rendered with the kind of precision that takes hours, and someone who understands what they are commemorating. The eyes were hollow, inked deliberately to communicate something specific. Not fierceness, not aggression, the particular absence that lives in the faces of people who have seen too much and chosen to stay anyway. Below the eagle in block lettering that was small but clear in the harsh neon light, 160T-H, Special Operations Aviation Regiment, and below that, smaller still, death waits in the dark. The room did not go quiet gradually. It went quiet all at once, the same way it had when the Glock was chambered at the beginning of the evening, except that this was different. The first silence had been the silence of threat assessment. This one was something else. This one was the silence of recognition. Ghost Calloway crossed the room. He moved slowly and with great deliberateness, and he did not stop moving until he was standing in front of Marlowe Reeves. Then he did something that nobody in the Iron Wolf Motorcycle Club had ever seen him do in 11 years of knowing him. He stood at attention. It was not a showy thing. It was simply precise, spine straight, chin level, heels together, right hand rising to his brow in a salute that had nothing performative about it. It was the real thing rendered with muscle memory that had been laid down young and never entirely undone. "Ma'am," he said. The word carried weight that the room felt without understanding. Diesel Hargrove, who had faced down federal agents and rival clubs and men who wanted his position and his life, was standing very still. The expression on his face was one he did not often wear. He was looking at Marlowe Reeves with something new in his eyes. "What's a night stalker?" said the young biker near the back wall, the same one who had whispered twice already, still young enough that what he witnessed tonight would stay with him in vivid detail for decades. Ghost lowered his hand. He turned slightly toward the room, and when he spoke to all of them because he had decided that this moment required witnesses. "The 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment," he said, "is a unit of the United States Army that flies helicopters into places other helicopters do not go. They fly at night. They fly low. They fly into active combat zones, into hot extractions, into situations where the margin between success and catastrophe is measured in seconds." He paused. "Their medics go in with them. Every time." He turned back to Marlowe. "I served 3 tours," he said to her. "Not with the 161st, with the 82nd Airborne. Gulf War 1991. Forward operating positions outside Kuwait City." He reached back to the table behind him and picked up the bronze coin worn smooth at the edges. Heavy for its size, the kind of object that carries more than its physical weight. He held it between his thumb and forefinger without offering it, just holding it. "August of 91, I was in a forward position that took mortar fire at 0300. 3 of us went down. I had 2 rounds in my left side and 1 in my shoulder, and I was losing blood fast enough that the math was not good." The room was absolutely silent except for the rock music, which someone had finally turned off somewhere in the last 30 seconds, leaving only the distant sound of the street outside. "The medic who came for me was 23 years old, weighed maybe 140 pounds. The landing zone was still taking fire when the bird came in. I watched that medic work on 2 other men before she got to me in a crater in the ground, with rounds coming in close enough to feel, and she did not hurry. She was precise. She was calm. She saved my life and the lives of the 2 men she reached before me." Ghost's voice had not changed in volume, but something in it had deepened. "I have been turning this coin over for 30 years, wondering if there was any way to find her and say what should be said. I never found her." He looked at Marlowe. "I'm not saying you are her. I am saying that tonight, for the first time in 30 years, I am looking at someone with the same eyes." The silence that followed was different from all the silences that had come before it. It was not the silence of tension or threat or calculation. It was the silence of a room full of men who had just been shown something they did not have a category for, and who were each in his own way working to find one. Diesel Hargrove sat down on a bar stool. This was not a dramatic gesture. It was simply the action of a man who has realized the ground has shifted and decided he would rather face what comes next from a position of honesty than continue to stand on ground that is no longer under him. "All right," he said quietly. "Talk." Marlowe looked at Ghost for a moment longer. Then she lowered her weapon to a position that was not holstered, but was no longer pointed at anyone. She made a decision and the room could see her make it. Helmand Province, she said. 2009, night extraction. Navy SEAL team, 6 men pinned down in a compound that had been compromised. We went in at 0200 because that is when the 161st goes always in the dark. You fly into places other helicopters do not fly. At ours, other pilots do not fly, and you bring people home. She was not looking at the room. She was looking at something that was not in the room, the distant gaze of someone describing a thing they have never entirely left. We were 50 feet off the ground when the RPG hit the rear rotor. The pilot died before he could transmit. The co-pilot's back was broken on impact. We had 6 wounded SEALs aboard and a helicopter going down in hostile territory, and I had approximately 4 seconds to make decisions that I will spend the rest of my life living with. Nobody moved. We went down hard, but in one piece. A shallow ravine gave us cover on 3 sides. I had 2 dead aircrew, 6 wounded operators, no air support, no working radio, and fighters moving toward our position. She paused. The next 3 hours I worked in the dark. I lost 2 of the SEALs. I saved 4. She said it without inflection, not because she did not feel it, but because she had learned that some things must be stated plainly or they become about the feeling rather than the fact. I received the Combat Medical Badge, the Bronze Star, with V device and the Purple Heart. And then, Ghost said, and then the after-action review identified an intelligence failure that had put that SEAL team in a compromised position. Faulty source. Bad information passed up the chain without sufficient verification. 6 men went in because someone did not do their job, and 2 of them did not come home. She looked at Ghost directly. The families of those 2 men were told their sons died in a training accident. The room was so quiet that the bar's refrigeration unit cycling on in the back was audible. The Army presented me with a classification agreement. Standard language. Non-disclosure on all aspects of the operation, including cause of loss and intelligence failures contributing to the incident. I was told it was necessary for national security. I was told my service record, my career, my pension, everything I had built over 9 years would be protected if I signed. She stopped. I asked if the families had been told the truth. Another stop, shorter. They told me the families had been informed as much as could safely be disclosed. Ghost closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, the expression on his face was the expression of a man who has heard this story before in different versions many times over many decades. I did not sign, Marlowe said. I took the honorable discharge at 33 and I started over. The sentence landed like the last piece of something falling into place. It was Stellan Vance who moved first. He had been against the side wall for the last several minutes, and his position had shifted by increments small enough to read as restlessness, a man who could not stay still while the tension ran high. He was now within 10 feet of the side door. The movement had been patient and gradual and nearly imperceptible. Marlowe had been watching him since the moment she walked in. Stellan, she said. She had not used his name before. She did not know his name. She used it because she had heard it spoken once across the room 40 minutes ago in a conversation she had appeared not to be listening to. He stopped. I would not, she said. The room turned toward him. Ghost Calloway turned toward him. The expression on Ghost's face when he looked at Stellan Vance was the expression of a man in the process of understanding something he had been close to understanding for a while, pieces that had been in front of him all along, assembling at last into their true shape. Diesel stood. Stellan Vance was 44 years old. He had a broad face and dark eyes and the kind of physical solidity that comes from years of labor rather than exercise. He had been with the Iron Wolf Club for 6 years long enough to earn the road captain patch, long enough to build relationships that looked from the outside like loyalty. He did not run. He was not in the end built for running. He stood against the wall with his hands at his sides and looked at the room, looking at him, and whatever calculation he had been running for the past 40 minutes reached its conclusion. Marlowe crossed to him in 8 steps. She was not rough. She was efficient. She put herself between him and the door and held out her hand. The drive, she said, his jaw tightened. I have been watching you since I walked in, she said. You are the only one in this room who reacted before there was a reason to react before I said Webb's name. And your motorcycle, she added quietly, the warm engine on Caden's Kawasaki outside. You moved it tonight. Something shifted in his face. The cartel needed confirmation that the connection between this location and my son was still contained, she said. You drove his bike around the block and parked it back. A signal. That is why the engine was warm after 72 hours. She kept her hand extended. The drive, Stellan. Ghost Calloway's voice came from behind her, quiet as a coin set on a table. You wore the uniform once. It was not a question. Ghost had seen it, the posture, something in the way Stellan carried the extra weight of the years, the way he had held a position near the wall while everyone else moved. A man who had once known how to hold ground, a man who had forgotten why it mattered. Stellan's hand went to the inside of his jacket, slowly. Marlowe tracked the movement with her weapon, without theatrics. What he produced was a small external hard drive, matte black, the size of a deck of cards. He held it out. She took it. This, she said to the room, is why Detective Webb's cover was blown. This is why my son watched something he should not have seen through the fence of a garage on Thursday night. And this is why both of them disappeared within hours of each other. She turned the drive over in her hand. The names and operational details of every active undercover federal agent currently embedded in criminal organizations across the Midwest. Sold to the people who needed them most. Diesel Hargrove was looking at Stellan Vance with an expression that existed somewhere between fury and grief. How long? Stellan did not answer. How long? I had debts, Stellan said finally. His voice was flat and empty, the voice of someone who has run out of energy to construct a better version of the truth. They offered a way out. I took it. Ghost looked at him for a long moment, then he looked away. He picked up the bronze coin from the table behind him and turned it over once in his hand. He did not say anything more to Stellan. He did not need to. The silence was sufficient. The front door opened. Agent Dana Voss came through it the way a woman comes through a door when she has tactical teams on three sides of a building and federal warrants in her hand, which is to say she came through it with the quiet and absolute authority of someone who does not need to announce what she is, because what she is already apparent. She was 5 feet 4 inches tall. She wore a dark jacket over body armor and carried herself with controlled power that belongs to people who understand that authority does not require volume. Behind her, 4 members of her tactical team spread through the room with the practiced economy of a well-rehearsed operation. She looked at the room. She looked at Marlowe. She looked at the hard drive in Marlowe's hand. Mrs. Reeves, she said. Agent Voss, Marlowe said. Diesel Hargrove's head turned slowly from one of them to the other. You two know each other, he said. It was not a question. Between Voss and Marlowe passed something, not warmth exactly, but a recognition between two people who have dealt with each other across a complicated situation and come to understand that the other person is competent and does not require handling. 6 months, Marlowe said to the room. I have been consulting with the federal investigation for 6 months. Medical expertise, trauma pattern analysis, identifying victims in cases involving veteran communities. She paused. When Caden went missing, when I realized he had been near this location Thursday night, I called Agent Voss and volunteered to assist. Brick Donovan's voice came from the bar. You were the bait. I was the distraction, Marlowe said. The operation had been stalled for 3 years because someone was feeding information from the inside. They needed a reason to bring certain people into contact with the investigation under controlled conditions. She glanced at the drive in her hand. The gun was real. The threat was real. If any of you had hurt Caden, if this had gone differently, none of what I just told you would have changed what I was prepared to do. Ghost Calloway was watching her face when she said this. He believed her completely. Diesel Hargrove had been very still since Voss walked through the door. He was processing the comprehensive nature of what had just happened, the way the evening had been from his perspective, a series of events that seemed disconnected and were not. He was not a man who showed panic. What he showed instead was the focused internal stillness of someone cataloging the distance between where they are and where they thought they were going to be. Vincent Hargrove, Voss said, producing a document, I have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of racketeering, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, and obstruction of a federal investigation. What about murder? Diesel said. His voice was quiet. He looked in this moment less like a man at the top of a criminal organization and more like a man who had been carrying the weight of something for several days and was not certain he could fully account for it. The body they found, Marcus Webb. Agent Voss looked at him steadily. Detective Marcus Webb, she said, is alive. The room took a breath. The body recovered from the drainage ditch off County Road 7 belongs to a man named Miguel Thorne, a known associate of cartel operations who had been providing your club with intelligence on federal investigations. She let this land before continuing. When Thorne's handlers became concerned that he had become a liability, they resolved the concern in the way such organizations resolve liabilities. Brick Donovan sat down heavily on the nearest bar stool. Webb himself, Voss continued, received enough warning Thursday night to abandon his vehicle before the cartel's people reached him. He spent 48 hours moving on foot through the county before our team intercepted him Saturday morning. He has been fully debriefed. His testimony combined with other evidence gathered tonight closes the case. Diesel Hargrove closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, something had gone out of his face, some quality of forward motion that had defined him since the moment Marlowe walked through his door. He looked like a man who has just been shown how far the ground had shifted and is beginning the slow work of accepting the new geography. Ghost Calloway had been watching Marlowe through all of this. He watched her absorb the confirmation that Webb was alive. He watched her stand against the wall of this room, still in the same position she had taken at the beginning of the evening, still tracking every movement in the space around her, with the automatic awareness of someone who had learned that the moment you stop watching is usually the moment something goes wrong. She was exhausted. Ghost could see it in the quality of her stillness, the kind that is not rest but conservation of what remains. She had been running on something harder than energy for 3 days. Something that does not have a clean name, but that Ghost recognized from his own history. He had seen it in himself once. Years ago in a hospital after Kuwait, where he had lain in a bed and not been able to explain to the doctors or his family why, when they told him he was safe, the words did not produce the thing they were supposed to produce. Because the body takes longer than the facts. Because the nervous system runs on its own clock and it does not reset simply because the situation has been resolved. Marlowe Reeves had not found her son yet. She had taken down a criminal organization, identified a mole, held off 18 armed men, and moved an investigation forward in 4 hours that had not moved in 6 months. But she had not found Caden. And until she did, none of the rest of it was real to her in the way it needed to be real. "Ja Voss," she said. Her voice was exactly as steady as it had been from the moment she walked through the door. "Where is my son?" Agent Dana Voss did not answer immediately. This was not evasion. It was the pause of someone choosing how to deliver information that carries weight, the half second that a doctor takes before speaking, or a chaplain, or anyone who has learned that the way a truth arrives matters almost as much as the truth itself. Voss had been in federal law enforcement for 19 years. She had delivered news of many kinds to many people in many rooms. She knew the difference between information and the experience of receiving it, and she treated that difference with the seriousness it deserved. "Your son," she said, "has been in federal protective custody since Thursday night." The room was very quiet. Marlowe Reeves stood against the wall of the Iron Wolf Motorcycle Club and received this information with an expression that did not immediately change. This was not because she was not feeling it. It was because the body has its own processing time, and the nervous system does not reorganize itself at the speed of words. She had been running on 3 days of the worst kind of fear, the kind that does not announce itself as fear, but instead presents as focus, as motion, as the refusal to stop moving. And that kind of running does not simply stop when the reason for it resolves. "Since Thursday," she said, "since approximately 11:17 p.m. Thursday evening," Voss confirmed, 2 minutes after he called 911. "Our team had been monitoring the garage on Devlin Street as part of the broader operation. When Caden made the call, we had agents on site within minutes. He was cooperative, he was unharmed, and he was transferred to a secure location Friday evening after initial processing." Marlowe was very still. "We have been attempting to reach you since Friday morning," Voss continued, and something in her voice had shifted, careful in a way that acknowledged what she was about to say required honesty. "We contacted the hospital. We were told you were working and that messages would be passed to you. We sent agents to your apartment Friday afternoon and again Saturday morning. We left contact information with 3 of your colleagues whose names Caden provided. I was working consecutive shifts," Marlowe said. "I slept in the on-call room. I was using the hospital phones for everything." "We know that now," Voss said. "We did not know it Friday. My charger broke Thursday night." The sentence was so simple, so small, so entirely out of proportion with the 72 hours it had produced that Ghost Calloway, who was standing 8 feet away and had survived 3 combat tours and 30 years of living with what those tours had cost him, felt something shift behind his sternum in a way he had not expected. A $7 piece of wire and plastic. 72 hours. Marlowe turned the hard drive over in her hand one last time and held it out to Voss. "Stellan Vance, 6 years inside the club. The drive contains operational details of active federal embeds across the Midwest. He sold Webb's cover. He was moving to destroy the drive when I stopped him." Voss took it. She looked at it for a moment, Then she looked at Marlowe with something that was not quite admiration and not quite apology, but carried elements of both. The operation has been stalled for 14 months because of that leak. We knew we had one. We could not locate it. Now you have, Marlowe said. It was not said with pride or satisfaction. It was said the way Marlowe said most things plainly because the plain version was sufficient. What was underneath the plainness was something that Voss could see and Ghost could see, and perhaps one or two others could see. A woman who had come in looking for her son and had along the way dismantled 3 years of obstruction with a broken phone charger and a Glock 19, and the irreducible quality of someone who has been trained past the point where circumstances dictate behavior. Diesel Hargrove was sitting on his bar stool with the posture of a man who has made peace with a situation he cannot change. He had his hands on his thighs and he was looking at the floor in front of him with an expression that sat between resignation and something that in its quietest form resembled relief. The expression of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just been relieved of it in a way they did not choose but are in some unexamined place not entirely sorry for. He looked up at Marlowe. He studied her face for a moment with the attention of a man trying to fix something in his memory. "You know what I thought when you walked through that door," he said. She waited. "I thought you were the most reckless person I had ever seen." He said it without contempt, almost with a kind of wonder. "I thought this woman has no idea what she walked into." He stood slowly with the deliberateness of a large man who has decided to do something and is going to do it with whatever dignity the moment allows. "I was wrong," he said. He walked toward the federal agents waiting near the door. He did not look back. Voss pulled Marlowe aside not far, just to the edge of the room, far enough that the conversation could be held without an immediate audience. She did it with a gesture rather than words, a slight tilt of her head, and Marlowe followed because she recognized it for what it was. "Caden is at a secure facility approximately 40 minutes from here," Voss said quietly. "He has been asking about you every hour since Friday morning. One of my agents has been keeping a log because the request became a kind of structure for him, something to organize the waiting around." Marlowe absorbed this. "He has been cooperating fully," Voss continued. "His testimony is going to be significant. He witnessed the moment Stellan Vance made the phone call that identified Webb to the cartel contact. What Caden saw through that fence was Vance on the phone watching Webb walk away, and 15 minutes later, Webb was being run off the road 12 miles east of here. Caden did not know exactly what he had seen. He knew it was wrong. He called 911 and described everything in detail." "He was raised to do that," Marlowe said. "He was." Voss paused. "The trials are going to take time. Stellan Vance is looking at federal charges that will keep prosecutors busy for 2 years minimum. Hargrove's organization has connections that reach 4 other states. The cartel network is still active, and Caden is a material witness." She let this settle. "I want you to understand what that means before you see him." Marlowe understood what it meant. She had understood it since the moment Voss confirmed that Caden had witnessed something connected to an active cartel network. She had been understanding it in the background part of her mind that never fully stood down since Thursday night. "Witness protection," she said. "It is one option, not the only one. The threat assessment over the next 48 hours will tell us what level of protection is actually required." Voss met her eyes. "But I want to be honest with you. The organization that Miguel Thorne worked for does not treat loose ends as acceptable. Caden is a loose end in their accounting." "So am I," Marlowe said. Voss held her gaze. "Yes." The two women looked at each other in the silence that exists between people who are both accustomed to operating in the space where calculation and risk and human consequence intersect, and who are in the process of determining what they owe each other in terms of honesty. "You used me tonight," Marlowe said. It was not an accusation. It was an observation being placed on the table for examination. Voss did not look away. "You volunteered." "I volunteered to help find my son and to assist with the operation. I did not know the full scope of the federal surveillance. I did not know the operation had been running for 3 years. I did not know the depth of the cartel connection." She paused. "You briefed me on what you needed me to know to get me through that door. You did not brief me on what I would have needed to know to make a fully informed decision." The silence between them was the silence of truth being recognized rather than disputed. "No," Voss said. "I did not." Another pause. "And you handled it better than anyone I could have put in that room who knew everything." "That is not the point." "I know it is not the point." Voss looked toward the window where the lights of federal vehicles cast patterns through the glass. Mrs. Reeves, I have been in this work long enough to know that the way we use people is sometimes not the way we should use people, and that those two things do not always resolve cleanly. You deserved a fuller briefing. You did not get one. I can tell you that what you accomplished tonight has moved this investigation further in 4 hours than we moved it in the previous 6 months, and I can tell you that your son is safer tonight because of what you did. Those things are true. They do not make the other thing less true. Marlowe was quiet for a moment. She looked at the tactical vest beneath her torn scrubs, at the tattoo on her shoulder. Visible now, the eagle and the words that had stopped a room cold an hour ago. 40 minutes, she said. I can have a car ready in 5. I need 5 minutes first. Ghost Calloway was near the back wall, separate from the controlled activity of the federal agents processing the room. He had been cooperative and quiet since Voss's team arrived, answering what was asked, going where he was directed, doing nothing to complicate the operational logistics of a federal arrest. He had spent 11 years doing very little to complicate anything which was its own kind of choice and its own kind of cost, and he had been aware of the cost longer than he had been willing to examine it. He saw Marlowe coming toward him and straightened without deciding to. She stopped in front of him. She was still holding herself the same way she had held herself all evening, weight forward, awareness outward, the weapon now holstered, but the posture of readiness not yet released, perhaps not capable of being released in the immediate aftermath of a night like this one. He understood this. The body takes its own time. You did not have to do what you did, she said. What you said, in front of them. No, Ghost agreed. I did not. It helped. I know it helped. That is why I did it. He looked at her steadily. I have been in rooms full of men who had decided on a course of action that was going to go badly for everyone. Sometimes all it takes is someone saying the right thing at the right moment to give the room permission to make a different choice. You gave them most of what they needed. I added the last piece. You were taking a risk. I have been in rooms where the risk of saying the wrong thing was measured in lives, he said. This was not that room. These are not bad men, most of them. They are men who made choices over time that compounded in directions they did not fully anticipate. That description covers a considerable portion of the human race. He glanced toward where Diesel was being processed near the front. Hargrove built something that grew past his ability to control it. That is a tragedy in the original sense of the word, the kind where the flaw and the outcome are connected. Marlowe followed his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at Ghost. You said you have been asking yourself for 30 years if it meant something, she said. The service. Everything you went through. I have. Have you answered it? Ghost Calloway was quiet for a moment. He looked down at the bronze coin in his hand, the worn disc that had traveled with him from Kuwait through 30 years of ordinary American life, through VA appointments and nightmares that had eventually faded to once or twice a year, through the motorcycle club that had given him a community of men who did not require him to explain why. He sometimes went quiet in the middle of a conversation and stared at nothing. Through all of it, he had carried this coin and the question attached to it every day for 3 decades, turning it over in the dark when the silence in his chest got heavy enough to feel like something solid. Tonight, he said, I think I am closer than I have been. He held out the coin. She looked at it. She looked at him. That belongs to you. It does, he said. I am choosing to give it to you. He kept his hand extended. I have been carrying this coin and the question attached to it for 30 years. Tonight you gave me as much of an answer as I am likely to get. It seems right that you carry it forward and I carry the answer. She took it. It was warm from his hand. Heavier than it looked, the way things that have been carried a long time tend to feel heavier than their actual weight, as if the years of handling have added something that is not measured in ounces. She closed her fingers around it. Thank you, Ghost, she said. He nodded once. The nod of a man who has said what needed to be said and does not need to add to it. Behind them, the federal operation continued its methodical work. Evidence was cataloged, statements taken, and the infrastructure of the Iron Wolf Motorcycle Club was being carefully dismantled by people who had been planning this evening for a long time. Brick Donovan was at the bar with his wrists wrapped in a bandage that Marlowe had applied before Voss pulled her aside. She had done it without comment, with the same economy she brought to everything medical. And Brick had watched her do it with an expression he had not yet organized into words. Ren Stafford was at the far end of the bar, giving a statement to a federal agent with the cooperative efficiency of someone who has spent years observing things she never wanted to be asked about and is now quietly relieved to have been asked. The young biker near the back wall, the one who had whispered twice and gone pale and watched everything with the large absorbing attention of someone still young enough that what they witnessed today stays with them for the rest of their lives, was sitting on the floor against the wall, with his elbows on his knees, staring at nothing and thinking about everything. Marlowe looked at him for a moment. He reminded her of Caden, not in his face or his build or anything specific, but in the quality of his youth, the sense of someone still becoming the person they would eventually be, with the outcome not yet determined. She hoped he would choose well. She filed it and moved on. The drive took 38 minutes. Voss sat in the front with the driver. Marlowe sat in the back. The Kansas City streets were mostly empty. At this hour, the emptiness of a Midwestern city in the deep middle of the night, streetlights reflected in wet pavement, the occasional traffic signal cycling through its sequence for nobody. Marlowe watched the city pass outside the window and felt the evening begin very slowly to release its hold on her body. Not all at once. That was not how it worked. She knew from experience that the full release would take days, that she would wake tomorrow night from a dream about the clubhouse and lie in the dark assembling the pieces for a moment before she remembered that the pieces had resolved, that the story had an ending she could live with. She had lived through other nights that required this kind of waking up. She had assembled herself each time. She had continued. She opened her hand and looked at Ghost's challenge coin in her palm. Bronze, worn smooth at the edges. She turned it over and held it near the window to read the other side in the moving light. Loyalty above all, except honor. She closed her hand again. The car slowed. A nondescript building on a nondescript block architecture designed specifically to be forgettable. A federal agent at the door who checked Voss's credentials and stepped aside. A hallway that smelled of institutional carpet and recycled air. A second door. Voss stopped with her hand on the handle. "He is going to tell you he is fine," she said. "He has been saying it to every agent in that building for 3 days. He probably means most of it." She paused. "He has been scared. He has managed it well, but he has been scared." Marlowe nodded once. Voss opened the door. Caden Reeves was sitting at a table with a cup of coffee he had been ignoring and a paperback novel he had read 40 pages of without retaining any of it. He was wearing the same jeans he had been wearing Thursday night, with a federal-issue gray sweatshirt over them. He had not shaved in 3 days, and the result was the thin, uneven growth of someone who was 19 and still negotiating with their own face about the terms of adulthood. He looked up when the door opened. He looked at his mother. He stood up so fast that his chair scraped back across the floor. And what happened next was not cinematic or composed or any of the things that the preceding 3 days of fear and determination and gunmetal precision had been. It was simply the meeting of a 19-year-old boy and his mother in a room with bad lighting and industrial carpet after 72 hours that neither of them would ever fully explain to anyone who had not lived through something similar. She held him the way she had held Harold Decker when she refused to stop, with her whole body, with everything she had, with the specific quality of grip that means I am not letting go. He did not pull back. He was shaking slightly. She could feel it in his shoulders and his back. She recognized it as the body releasing what it had been holding, the shaking that comes when the necessity of being strong is over, and the organism finally permits itself to process what it could not process while it was still needed for other things. She had experienced this herself in a supply room in a forward operating base, and once in a helicopter over the Gulf of Mexico in the aftermath of things she did not speak about. She had held others through it. She knew what it felt like from both sides. She held him until the shaking stopped. He stepped back and looked at her, at the torn scrubs, the tactical vest, the dried blood on her forearm, the exhaustion that was no longer being concealed because there was no longer anyone it needed to be concealed from. "Agent Rodriguez told me you went to the club," he said. "Yes. Mom." He said the word with the specific mixture of fear and disbelief in something that wanted to be reproach but could not quite commit to it. "That was, you cannot just—" He stopped. He looked at her. He was 19 years old, and he was trying to find the words for what you say to the person who walked into a room full of armed men for you, and he was discovering that there were no words for this in English or any other language that were fully adequate to the task. "I'm fine," she said. "Are you actually fine? Or are you fine the way you always say you're fine when you're not?" She almost smiled. "Both, mostly the first." He looked at the torn shoulder of her scrubs, at the tattoo now fully visible. He had seen it all his life. It had been part of the landscape of his childhood, the eagle on his mother's shoulder, in the same category as the way she made coffee or the way she drove something familiar and present and not fully understood. He had known in a child's abstract way what the words meant without the context to fill them with weight. He was looking at them now with different eyes. The agents told me some things, he said, about the 160th, about what you did. He paused. About why you left. She waited. You never told me, he said, and it was not an accusation. It was the same thing she had done all evening, a truth placed plainly on the table for examination. No, she said, I did not. Why, she had considered versions of this answer for 5 years in the way you consider things you are not ready to say, turning them over, testing their edges, setting them down again. Because some of it I was not allowed to say for a long time, and by the time I was accountable only to myself, I did not know how to begin. He was quiet, absorbing this. I want to know, he said. All of it, not tonight, but I want to know. I know you do, she said, and I will tell you. He sat back down at the table. She sat across from him. The untouched coffee sat between them. The paperback lay face down where it had been abandoned. I was so scared, he said. Not of the men he had seen in the parking lot Thursday night. Not of the federal agents who had taken him away from his life without warning. Of something simpler and larger than both of those things, the fear that his mother did not know what had happened and would come looking and would go somewhere dangerous because she believed he was in danger when he was not. I know, Marlowe said. That is exactly what you did. I know. He looked at her across the table with the dark, watchful eyes she had given him. You taught me. When you do not know what to do, call the people trained to help. You said that to me since I was 8 years old. You did exactly that, she said. You saw something wrong, and you called 911, and you described what you know, and you went with the agents when they came. That was exactly right. I was scared the whole time. Being scared and doing it anyway, she said, is the only kind of courage that counts. He looked at her for a moment. Is that something they taught you in the Army? No, she said. That is something I learned watching you. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. This was such a simple and ordinary gesture. A 19-year-old boy putting his hand over his mother's hand in a federal safe house at 2 in the morning that Marlowe Reeves, who had not cried once in the preceding 72 hours, who had held herself at a controlled and operational distance from her own terror through 3 days of back-to-back shifts in one confrontation with 18 armed men and the full accumulated weight of everything she had ever been trained to do and had tried to leave behind, felt her eyes fill. She did not look away. She let it be what it was. Voss came in 20 minutes later. She sat down at the table with a folder in the manner of someone who has allowed a human moment its full time and has now returned to the requirements of the work. The threat assessment will take 48 hours, she said. In the meantime, I want both of you to stay here. This facility is secure, and after tonight, I would rather have you inside it. Well, Caden looked at Marlowe. Marlowe looked at Voss. And after the 48 hours, Marlowe asked, then we have a conversation about what comes next. Witness protection is one option. Enhanced security protocols at your existing location is another, and there are options between those two. The right answer depends on what the assessment tells us about the cartel's current operational capacity and their interest in Caden's testimony. How long does the testimony process take? From indictment to trial, given the scope, 12 to 24 months minimum. Possibly longer if the cartel connections generate additional federal charges, which I expect they will. A year, maybe 2. Marlowe had rebuilt her life once from the empty-handed departure from the Army at 33 to the Kansas City emergency room and the apartment on Clement Street and the slow, quiet accumulation of a life that belonged entirely to her and to Caden. She knew how it was done. She knew it was possible because she had done it. She knew it was hard for the same reason. She looked at the challenge coin sitting on the table in front of her, where she had set it when she sat down. The eagle on one face, the motto on the other. Loyalty above all, except honor. She had chosen honor over loyalty once in a conference room at Fort Bragg, across a table from 2 colonels and a GI officer, and the choice had cost her everything she had built in 9 years. She had never fully stopped believing it was the right choice. She picked up the coin. There is something else I want to say to you, Voss said, before we get into logistics. Marlowe waited. What you did tonight, walking into that building, managing that situation, identifying the mole, recovering the drive, that was not the function you were asked to perform. You were asked to provide a distraction. Voss paused. What you provided was a resolution, and I was not fully honest with you about what you were walking into, which is something I am going to have to account for. She held Marlowe's gaze steadily. The federal agencies I work with are going to be very interested in talking with you once this is settled. Not as a witness, as someone with a skill set that is uncommon and that does not age out. Marlowe looked at her. You are offering me a job. I am telling you that when you are ready to think about what comes next, there are options. Options that do not require you to choose between being his mother and being what you are. Voss stood. But that is a conversation for another day. Tonight, get some sleep. She left the folder on the table and walked out. Caden looked at the folder. He looked at his mother. What are you going to do? Marlowe turned the coin over in her hand. She thought about Ghost Calloway, standing in the corner of the clubhouse, turning this same coin over in his palm for 30 years, carrying a question that had not resolved until tonight. She thought about what it meant to carry something that long and what it meant when it finally found its answer. She thought about Harold Decker, the man she had pulled back from a flat line on a Thursday evening, who had been going to the grocery store to buy flowers because he forgot every year, and his wife teased him about it every year. She thought about the 2 seals she had not been able to save in a ravine in Helmand Province, and the 4 she had, and the difference between those numbers and what the difference costs over time. She thought about Caden at 8 years old asking her once why she kept the gun in the glove compartment, and herself saying, because you take care of the things that matter, and you make sure you can use them when you need to. She thought about a broken phone charger, 72 hours. The things that change everything are almost never the size you would expect them to be. I do not know yet, she said, which was the truth. But I know we are going to be all right. Caden looked at her with the eyes she had given him, dark and watchful, and taking in more than they gave away, and nodded. He believed her because he had been given reasons to believe her, accumulated over 19 years, of watching her move through the world without flinching at the things that required courage, and without making a performance of the courage itself. He fell asleep in his chair an hour later, the deep, sudden sleep of a young person whose body has been holding something tense for 3 days and has now been given permission to release it. His head was tilted back slightly. His breathing was slow and even. He looked in sleep closer to the 8-year-old who had asked about the gun in the glove compartment than to the 19-year-old who had stood outside a garage on a cold Thursday night and known that what he was seeing was wrong. She looked at him for a long time. Then her phone buzzed. A message from Voss: preliminary threat assessment, moderate risk manageable with enhanced protocols. Relocation likely not required. Full results in 48 hours. Also separate situation. Family and federal witness program. Father facing retaliation threat. 3 children. No one on current team has your combination of clinical and tactical experience. No pressure. When you're ready. Marlowe read it twice. Set the phone on the table. She looked at Ghost's coin in her closed fist. The actual weight and the other weight, 30 years of one man's question, and whatever the beginning of an answer felt like when you finally held it. She picked up the phone. She typed 2 words. Send coordinates. She set the phone down and did not add to it because nothing needed to be added. Outside, the Kansas City night was doing what nights do, cycling toward the hour before dawn, that still and dimensionless stretch of time when the previous day is fully gone and the new one has not yet committed to arriving, and the world exists in a kind of held breath that feels, if you are sitting in it with someone you love, less like emptiness and more like space. The federal facility was quiet around her. Down the hall, agents worked through the night on the paperwork that large operations generate in their aftermath. Somewhere across the city, Diesel Hargrove was being processed. Stellan Vance was in an interview room accounting for 6 years of choices that had compounded past the point he had permitted himself to look at directly. Cobra Walsh and the others were doing the same in their own ways, in their own rooms, with their own particular versions of that accounting. Ghost Calloway was somewhere in that process too, not as a defendant, but as a witness, which was its own kind of reckoning. He would cooperate. Marlowe knew this without being told. He was a man who had been waiting for a reason to cooperate with something larger than himself for longer than he had realized, and tonight had given him one. He would carry the answer now, and she would carry the coin, and both of them would be lighter for the exchange. She thought about the young biker on the floor against the wall, still becoming whoever he was going to be. She hoped the night would land in him the right way, that it would be the kind of thing a person looks back on at 60 or 70 and understands was a turning point, a moment that offered a choice and made the choice visible in a way that could not be unseen. She hoped he chose well. Caden's breathing was slow and even across the table. She looked at him for a long moment. Her son, 19 years old. Greasy jeans and a federal sweatshirt, and 3 days of thin beard and the paperback he had not been able to read, and the coffee he had not been able to drink, and the phone log of 60-odd hourly requests to know if his mother had been found yet. She looked at the challenge coin in her hand. Loyalty above all, except honor. She thought about what it meant to carry both of those things at the same time: a loyalty to the people you love and honor to the truth of who you are, and how most people spent their lives trying to choose between them, and how the people who did not have to choose were the ones who had figured out, usually at great cost, that the two things were not opposites at all. They were the same thing, stated differently, arrived at differently, but the same destination if you stayed on it long enough and did not stop when it got hard. She set the coin on the table between herself and her sleeping son. She did not close her eyes. Not yet. The night was not done with her entirely, and she knew better than to release her watch before it was time. But she let her shoulders settle. She let the weight of the evening move down through her body and into the chair and the floor, the way weight moves when you finally allow it to. Outside, somewhere in the direction of the city, the first thin line of gray was beginning to show at the edge of the dark, not yet light, but the suggestion of light, the announcement that light was coming, whether the dark was ready for it or not. Marlowe Reeves had come in looking for her son. She had found him in a safe house in Kansas City, Missouri, asleep in a federal-issue sweatshirt, breathing slowly, asking about his mother every hour until the asking was no longer necessary. She had also found something she had not expected to find, and had not gone looking for the part of herself she had folded away at 33 and tried to live without. Not the uniform, not the unit, not the rank or the record, or the commendations that sat in a box in her closet under a layer of things she had placed on top of them with careful deliberateness. Something older than those things and harder to put in a box. The thing that had made her refuse to sign. The thing that had made her walk through a door that any reasonable person would have walked away from. The thing that had made her stand in the center of a room full of armed men and not flinch, not because she was not afraid, but because she was something that fear did not get to stop. Some people spend their whole lives looking for a reason to use what they have been given. Marlowe Reeves had found hers at 2 in the morning in a room full of men who had almost made the last mistake of their lives. She would find it again in 48 hours when the coordinates came through and she followed them to wherever the next family was waiting, and the time after that. And the time after that. Not because the battlefield had not changed, it had changed completely, from the dark skies over Helmand to the fluorescent lights of an emergency room to the neon of a motorcycle club on a cold October night. The terrain was always different, but the mission had always been the same. Protect the people who cannot protect themselves. Tell the truth even when it costs you everything. Do not leave anyone behind. The coin sat on the table between her and her son. The night moved toward morning. Marlowe Reeves stayed where she was and kept watch the way she had always kept watch, the way she would keep watch for as long as she was able. It was in the end simply who she was.